Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new Founder and Friends. Today, I'm joined by David Horowitz. Hi, David.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very good. It's great to be here in New Jersey. We've been doing this tour and meeting with various different customers, former customers, and having some good chats. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really appreciate the time. So everybody watching this has probably heard me do other intros. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your story, particularly even how you started to get into technology and business from the very get-go.
Sure. So I don't want to date myself, but I've been in product and technology for over 25 years. I started actually in finance, and coming out of business school in the 90s, I went into a program where I was going to be a trader, an FX trader, and I really enjoyed the systems, and I was always tinking around on the computer, but usability was probably one of my more important traits that I really like to focus on. So I got into a company where we were building trading models, and we took them in Excel, and we were rebalancing people's portfolios automatically, and I was like, oh, that's great, but it's so slow, it doesn't look right. How's anybody who doesn't understand computers going to deal with this thing? So we started to make it look better. We started to add different colors and cues, like the red, yellow, green, and then being able to use the sliders. And technology was producing at a very good rate back then, but we had Excel, and that was what we lived with. So I did that for several years. We built these trading systems. I really got into the product side of it more than the technology side of it, and then the internet wave came. And I was recruited by a company called Juno Online Services, which was like the AOL competitor. We gave out the CDs, and we had email, and we had internet, and you could dial up on the phone. Oh, God, I feel like I'm so dating myself now. And people don't even know what dial-up is now. But I went there for a few years, and I ran their product management department. And it was really interesting to me how the different types of users there could be, how everybody has a different experience because they understand things a lot differently. And again, it was up to us and our department to make it easy to use for the masses. There's always going to be a whole bunch of early adopters that can use it without any problems, but I don't even want to go to my mother and father, but when you go to your just older brothers or sisters who haven't been exposed to the technology, they weren't that savvy in it. So I went and did that for a while, and it was very successful. I got into this whole mobile computing business. So I went to a startup with the person that I used to work with at my finance company. He started off this company called Net, which was like an art project. And it basically was able to do visual searches back in the early 2000s. And what came out of it was the ability to show your website on a mobile phone.
Oh, cool.
So we would take websites on the fly, look at the headers, and then reformat it for all the different types of mobile phones. Back in the early 2000s, it wasn't just iOS and Android. I mean, it was hundreds and hundreds of different versions of screen size, and you had Nokia and all the different types of phones, all the different types of screens. But we were able to take the data, read the header, and then reformat it. Not with a lot of graphics back then, but we were able to show it to you on the phone. And we had a lot of customers, and I was there for a while. And I really did all the ins and outs of product management and technology back at that company. And that's really where I grew to love it. I was there for a long time, and then I petered out, and the company kind of petered out when the number of phones started to, or the number of devices and operating systems started to shrink. It was basically, at the end, it was BlackBerry, iOS was just starting, and Microsoft, Windows. And make a long story short, I went back into finance for a couple of years, and then I got picked up by a portfolio company, a PE firm, and they asked me to work for this company called TravelClick, where I ran their reservation solutions. Basically, TravelClick is a central reservation system that is connected to thousands of hotels across the world, and you were able to go and make a reservation for a hotel room online. And there's a half dozen ways that you can do that. You can do it through an online travel agent. You can call the hotel directly. You can go to a GDS, which is part of a travel agent system. Expedia and all these other online travel agents were coming out as well. So what was important was that, you don't oversell your capacity. You have a limited amount of inventory. Make a long story short, we took a declining product there. We reformatted it. We refaced it. We put a new face on it in terms of the internet and how you could also use it on your mobile device. And we started growing the product. We started adding services like when you check in or when you buy your hotel room, maybe you want some flowers or some champagne or something like that. So that really got us into the whole e-commerce and being able to upsell customers and allowing our product to grow. I did that for several years, and then we had a successful exit. And I went into a couple different areas, first in real estate, then in fintech. I started my own company with a hedge fund manager of mine where we built a product that was very good at picking stocks, and we sold that to another company. And then 5 or 6 years ago, I was approached by one of the private equity firms that I worked for before, and I was brought in to lead the product team at a company called Puppy Spot. Puppy Spot is a online marketplace that matches approved and vetted breeders and people looking for puppies, so to speak. And at first it may be like, well, what am I doing selling puppies? I don't know anything about puppy. I have a puppy, but it actually became very interesting, and it was probably one of the greatest jobs I've had. It allowed me to first start the product department, understand the customer, and realize how, well, first of all the bad actors in the space, because in the puppy adoption business, there's a lot of bad actors, and we were very against puppy mills. We were very pro-shelters. We wanted to make sure that, if you could get a dog from a shelter, you would, but that's not for everybody. So a few months into my tenure, the head of technology left, and I was given the responsibility to take over technology, product, and systems. Hence, I became the CIO of Puppy Spot, and we really... we did a nice job with the business in terms of growing it, being able to implement systems so that we could do a much broader online e-commerce service, created ancillary services so that we could also purchase other things when you're purchasing the dog. And then in the systems department, we rewrote the stack so that it was very open, and we would have continuous releases all the time, several a day sometimes, that would allow customers to be able to see improvements right away. And one of our vendors was Raygun, which
thank you,
brings me here today. And I can tell you that I don't do this for a lot of vendors, or I don't support a lot of vendors, but it happens to be a product that we utilized in its infancy, and then we continued to grow with it, and the features that came with it became very important, not just to my developers, but also to the management as well.
Yeah, that's always been something we've seen as well. Like, developers love Raygun from the, hey, I don't have to go through a lot of log files. I kind of get an idea of what's going on. I can fix the thing quickly. But to the business side, it's kind of like, well, this actually flows onto some very real business impact.
Absolutely. And that was kind of what piqued my interest, is why do the developers love it so much? So I started to tinker with it and get into it. And I started to look, I'm like, oh, well, this is a good reason, because I can see the exact error and what caused it. And, obviously, developers take a long time, are very methodical about how they go in and look at errors, but sometimes I can look at things that's happening all the time and just come up with this is so, we're losing the leading zero on this. That's exactly why it's not coming up with 5 digits. So, there's plenty of ways that we can both utilize it together and help make it a better piece of optimized software.
Yeah, 100%. And I sort of, you always hear that line, how did this ever work? Sometimes when you go and start looking into a bug,
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, and getting that visibility is hugely valuable. We're really proud to have Puppy Spot on board as well, by the way, so thank you for that. And over the years, I'm reflecting back on your story of your career. I didn't want to interrupt the story, but I remember back when, was it WAP for
WAP.
mobile?
Yes, I didn't want to I didn't even want to mention WAP, Wireless Application Protocol, because I didn't think anybody would even know what that meant. Yes, it was the caveman days back then.
Yeah, yeah. I do remember that moment. I think I didn't get a BlackBerry, but I did get the iPhone, and just being like, oh, a normal browser that can just load a normal web page. This is great. But yeah.
3G. Oh my God, we don't have to use Edge anymore. It's so much faster with 3G.
Yeah, the times have changed. Yes. Cool. So one of the things I was keen to talk to you a little bit about is that kind of look at software quality, particularly from the vantage point of being more at the management layer, and hearing your experiences a bit more in there. You also have a background not just in the tech part, but you mentioned product, and I often think product, maybe it's a bit of a trite way of framing it, but I often think product wears the tension between delivery and the customer, and so they kind of have it has to make money and work for people, but I also have to be able to deliver it efficiently. Tell me a little bit about your journey in there and some of the things you've learned over the years in delivering great products.
Sure. So part of the reason I got into product and technology, in the beginning, it was always a battle. Product was going to be on one side of the table. Technology was going to be on the other side of the table. I was on the product side, and they reported to different people, and they thought that was the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. And it really wasn't, because, we learn a lot of things from the developers that we aren't aware of in terms of how things works, and the developers learn a lot of things about the product when we teach them what our goals and outcomes are. And so as a result, I brought the two units together, and I found that to be a much more successful piece. The technologists and the product people and the business people are all on the same page.
Yes.
They're building the same things, and they're all going towards the same outcomes. So certain outcomes, like how long it takes to do a transaction, how long does it take to load this web page, what is the size of the GIF what is the size of the picture that I'm going to be loading, how fast is my bandwidth, all these kind of things are people that understand it, but they all talk about it in different ways.
Yes. And
with the browsers that were coming down the pike, you had Netscape and IE4, IE5, IE6, and then Chrome, and then just all the different ways that people could use it. It was just blowing up in terms of different user experiences, and it was important that everybody understood what was working, what wasn't working. Mm-hmm. You had your QA, but QA could only do so much. They really couldn't imitate the real life experience, so to speak. So I kind of tried to bring all those together in the teams that I've been on, and as a result, we get high performing teams who are all going after the same outcomes. Mm-hmm. We're all looking at the same KPIs to say, maybe not sales versus efficiency or bug fixes or something like that, but we're all trying to go after, is our uptime going to be the same? Are we going to improve our speed over the quarter? Are we going to improve our time to market over the quarter? Are we going to improve these different metrics so that we could see we're at least going in the right direction?
Yeah.
Faster is always better when you're talking about the internet and page speed and just checkouts and things like that.
Yeah, I often feel like the performance story and giving that great experience, it's the piece that I think at a subtle level you feel the quality. You know that there's an attention to detail in the organization, and I think it bolsters some of the confidence in a brand, and ultimately a lot of business comes down to trust and faith in a brand. Do you believe that they're going to be on your side and things like that? So I think a lot of folks underestimate the subtle quality factor. Apple would be a company that obviously nails this 99% of the time.
Yes. But just talking a little bit more to that, it used to be, we want this feature in the product, and getting this feature in would be great. But you know what? The feature didn't perform like we wanted it to. Well, it slowed down your page speed and your load time by 30 seconds. So Raygun was one of the things that we allowed to say, not only do we want this feature in there, but we want this feature without decreasing our performance or by increasing our performance of the page speed at the same time, so that we can measure both deltas and see which one is really working.
Yep. I often think about that and talk about it within Raygun about attention metric. You very rarely want just a single KPI. There has to be the other side of that, which is the cost side, and whatever that cost might be. It might be performance in this scenario. But that helps to try and drive a better outcome overall, because ultimately it's a constraint. And I often find the more constraints is actually better because it defines the problem space more tightly.
And when you're dealing with, all the companies that I've been at have always had antiquated systems or legacy systems, so to speak, and then we're trying to get them on the most modern system. And what happens is as you fix things and as you add new features, you break two other things that you're not realizing. And that's important to know what you're breaking and why. Like, there's so much code that just sits there that you don't even need anymore, but you're afraid to take it out because you're afraid of what breaks. So you're allowed to experiment with removal of code and seeing if it has any impact in the number of errors that appear.
One of the things that we celebrate a lot at Raygun is usually seeing PRs that have massive deletes in them. How many lines of code were removed by putting this in there and celebrating that rather than seeing the expansion. Our code base is certainly large enough now where we have that same issue where it's kind of like, go and change something here, forget that subsystem 47 over there,
It also because nobody from subsystem 47 is around anymore. So as you get more developers that churn through the code, people forget about the different things that were put in, that were hard-coded, that were done. And Raygun actually allows you to see some things so you could say, oh, you know what? Like, look at the data in this error. This is hard-coded. Maybe we should not only fix that, but also take out and make it a parameter instead.
Yeah. I also... not specific to Raygun, but hearing the story a bit at Puppy Spot of how you implemented a CI/CD type approach to allow people to ship more frequently, I often see that these days as another sign of quality within an engineering or product team, and that ability to kind of measure how quickly we can get things to prod. I'll tell this as a little story, but few years back, we had this office, maybe two offices back for Raygun, and for whatever reason, they'd put a PIN code on the toilet door. And so we used to have the joke that if you joined as an engineer, we would only give you the PIN code once you'd shipped code to prod. So that actually created this weird sort of, it wasn't weird, we loved it, but it was this thing where it's like, well, we have to ensure somebody can join and probably have shipped code by lunchtime, right? Because it's a bit
yes,
cruel.
that will expedite the speed of the code.
Yeah, so, but that ability to then, respond and quickly adapt, and I've talked to some organizations, usually for regulatory reasons, that maybe do sort of, 2 releases a year, and I kind of imagine those scenarios as being very difficult to maintain quality.
Yes, and I've been in companies like that, especially when, back in the day and back in the early 2010s, so to speak. We would have to, we'd have to close down, like with a travel click, we'd have to shut down the application. And because we were used worldwide, there's not really any downtime for any hotels. But going down would be very risky, and it would obviously kill business. So we had to find a time like Sunday morning or something where it was limited in terms of who was down, and there wasn't a lot of people around to do that. It would be very inconvenient, and then bringing the system back up had its own problems. So the continuous deploy was, that's essential nowadays.
A huge one. I remember, just to share another story, we've always been, for those of you that know me, I'm kind of a nerd's nerd, even though I'm the CEO. And I remember we met with this customer one time, and one of my favorite questions to ask them is, what's the smallest annoyance you have? Because I find people quite frequently will make asks for maybe something that's a whole feature or maybe a whole product. But often I think there's a piece to humans where we don't want to acknowledge a small thing because it almost feels petty to bring it up. And yet often when you fix those things, the user experience dramatically improves. And I'll give you an example within Raygun, which was when you bring out the app switcher. We do have keyboard shortcuts. Obviously, not a lot of people use keyboard shortcuts on the web, but some devs really live by them. Mm-hmm. And what would happen is it would slide out, and there's a search box at the top if you have a lot of apps, to filter. But it wouldn't set focus on the text box. So if you hit the tilde key, you couldn't just start typing. And I was like, oh, that does sound kind of, a bit annoying. And I remember this customer told me this at the start of the meeting, and I kind of just quietly texted the team in the background, and it meant that by the end of the meeting, I could say, hey, that's now in production. It's live. And the funny thing was once it was in there, like even in our own office, it was like, God, this is so handy. So, such a Great experience.
Well, it's funny because it reminds me of something that I learned while we had Raygun. we were I don't even know the history, but we were an adopter since I got there. We started adopting it when I got there, and then I learned about this feature where you could pin a release.
Oh, yeah.
So you could look at the number of errors you had on the chart, and then you could also put the release down. And since we had continuous releases, you could see all the different releases that we had. And once we added that into our code where we could see that, it was so much easier to see what releases did well and what releases didn't do well. And then we could dive into the ones that didn't do well and ask ourselves why. And that was really enlightening for me.
Yeah. You're likely familiar with that framework called Jobs to be Done, and looking at that. And that was something we identified relatively early on, is that when, teams ship some code to prod, and there's this maybe 20 minutes, half an hour afterwards of did we just blow up the world? Or
Everybody's fingers and toes are crossed.
Yeah, and so that was a sort of a use case we wanted to try and help optimize for. And actually, on this trip, one of the things that we did get feedback on recently was several customers saying, it'd be really great if on the dashboard I could just say, just show me the latest deployment only, just so I can see as they come in, almost like a clean setup. So rather than having to go into deployment tracking, you can now just toggle that straight on with latest as the option. But again, another relatively small, but you kind of go, okay, the clarity now on what are the health issues with this new release skyrocketed.
Yes, and also the same thing with the speed of the pages. When I was able to see the speed of the pages, and because we were in a North American company, it doesn't really matter to me what the speed is in Europe or what the speed is in Asia. So we could filter out all those, and it really gets rid of a lot of the bad numbers because you have bots hitting your system from all over the world that can distort what your actual statistics are, and that was a very helpful feature as well.
Yeah, we do a lot of work on the Raygun performance story. I think we have a lot more data, I think, than sometimes people realize we ingest. We're dealing with many billions of inbound API calls with payloads up to about 1 megabyte in size, and so we get a lot of data in there. But one of the things that I think is a little bit of an advantage is we're headquartered in Wellington, New Zealand, and while we use multiple places within AWS to host our products, we primarily use US East 1. And so it means that our team is almost as far as possible from the data center. So we feel the slowness more than almost any of our customers. We're only about 8% of revenue actually comes from within New Zealand. We're predominantly North American customer base, but very distributed. And I kind of like that. I like the fact we have the worst experience. And then I moved to Seattle a few years back for several years as we expanded the business. And I was like, dear Lord, our app is blazingly fast when I'm within America. So I felt quite proud about that.
Yes, the performance is very good for us, and all the data that allows you to there's many features in it that we really like.
Yeah, Phil. We've got some really cool features coming up shortly. One of them that will probably be live by the time this comes out is a feature called AI error resolution. And so what this does is when you go into an error group, you can bring up a pane and you have a full chat like ChatGPT, but it'll give you a summary of what the error is and possible solutions to it. And, I've, like yourself, I've been in tech for about 30 years now, and I'm still amazed that given that experience, how useful it can be to be like, oh yeah, that could be the problem, and it's been super helpful. How do you kind of think about some of those things around the future of maybe creating better experiences, building better products? Is there anything in your mind about that?
Well, AI has changed the game dramatically over the last few years. And, yes, there's the customer service aspect of it where you can go in and, the customer can ask what the problem is, and you can look at the customer record directly. Mm-hmm. And sure, there are mistakes, but people make mistakes as well. So I just think it's a better user experience for the end user. If you take that over to coding, while I don't, I'm not a fan of having it replace the developer, having it help the developer and having them ask questions to the system, and the system automatically analyzing what is going wrong and why, at least giving ideas. Mm-hmm. That's where you get the big benefit out of it. is maybe there's something so obvious to the computer, but it's not obvious to the developer because they've seen the code 4,000 times.
Yep. You definitely get that problem of once you stare at any system for too long, you know, the beginner eyes are so valuable.
So valuable. And you know, you ask the questions that you would, like a normal consumer would ask or a business user would ask, but because the product manager or the developer or the salesperson has been doing this for years and years, they don't even they don't even think twice about it.
Well, it's a good example with the setting the focus on the search field one. You know, it's like it hadn't dawned on us, but we've been staring at this system for so many years. We've built a muscle memory that you just press the key and click the box. You know, and so that again is why I find that simple feedback can often be the most impactful. Those little delight factors in the product. You know, if you go and view the source code of any page in Raygun, it still has an ASCII art Raygun in there from when I, file new project, started building the product. It's actually an interesting recruitment tool because people sometimes get in touch and they go, you can improve your load time if you weren't sending an ASCII Raygun down the pipe every time. But yeah, I'm curious to hear any sort of stories that you might want to share because I find that as a developer, there is a huge value to also having the business understanding for really connecting that impact of software faults. You know, when I've just got my developer hat on, I'm looking at a bug and I almost see it as like a fun problem to be solved, and I might lose focus of the why, on there. You straddle both sides. You're connecting the customer, the business, the code, everything together. What are some of the things you'd find useful to maybe share with the developer audience that may be listening today?
So one of my favorite things that I learned about Raygun was the error tracking in it originally. And the developers always said how great their error tracking was, and I never really understood it. So finally I dug in one day and I decided to look at an error. And I'm like, wow, it's really granular. I can really pinpoint what happened for which session, for which user. And that comes in very handy when you have the CEO or the head of sales or a customer come into you and said, it wouldn't let me check out. I'm like, what do you mean it wouldn't let you check out? And they're like, well, I went to the checkout page and I tried to type something in and it just froze on me. I'm like, oh, okay. I wish there was a way I could do something about that. Well, with Raygun, there really is. You can go in and you can pinpoint the time. And if you pinpoint the time, then you can find the error that happened because there will be an error in the log. And then you can actually go in and see what's being sent behind the scenes. And when you look at it, although there's 14,000 lines of stuff you don't understand, there's 3 lines of stuff that you do understand. And you can really see, oh, you know what? It's not escaping that. Dollar sign, or it's dropping the leading zero, or some kind of just obvious answer, or you're on a browser, you're not on the latest version of the browser. Just so many things that you could fix and you can explain very quickly, and not only explain it to the CIO or to the customer, but then also explain it to the developer to see how they can possibly get around it in the next release. And oftentimes these little things are really little. It's really something that it's just, I need to escape this character or something like that. So that was one of the most important things that I think I found. Another important thing was the ability to see the speed of the web page and the different web pages that we had as you did the releases. So you could see them over time. You could see when we had an incident. You can see when we didn't have an incident. You could see sometimes it was really faster. You could drill down into why it was faster. Well, this person is, on a much faster line, or this person is in the different part of the country, or this person is in a remote part, or this person is using their phone to connect. And the mobile versus web, or tablet, web, and mobile, that came into a whole new way of creating goals and KPIs that we would be able to target our employees to think about. Most of our business was done in a mobile browser at the towards the latter part of 2020s. I left there about 6 months ago, and we had a lot of business on mobile browsers, but we were designing towards the website or towards the desktop first, and that's not something exactly. We have to switch that. We have to make it more responsive. We have to make it so it's usable on a tablet, so it's usable on a website, and so it's usable on the phone.
Yeah, I see that dynamic a lot where software developers, I think, sometimes underappreciate that they frequently have the most high-end machines that people are using. And usually when you're in development too, you're working off local hosts, so there's no latency in their database calls or anything, and you may perceive it to be very quick.
And so that's something that technical people and product people have the same thing. Is product people are thinking, you know what, on my computer it looks great. I don't understand how well, you have a 32-inch monitor, and somebody else is doing it on their handheld phone that's a 3-inch monitor. So yes, it's something that you have to take into consideration at both parties. So they both have to be working towards speed as a goal.
Yeah. I used to use the line of just saying to people, it's like, remember, sometimes it can be somebody, and obviously I'm dating myself on the quote, but sometimes it can be a person on an old iPhone 3GS that's on a hike up a mountain with 1 bar of reception. Like, what does that feel like? Yeah,
exactly. And then you'd see these outliers of people, it took 32 seconds to load this page. Well, guys in Ulaanbaatar. And, it's just, they don't have the best service there.
Yeah, so might have been fast. Yeah, and that all does tie, like I say, all back into the quality, the experience for the customer, how they enjoy the product. And yeah, once something is speedy and engaging, I find I just prefer to use that service, if it's going really quick. I'm a big fan of what's been coming out with the Core Web Vitals stuff from Google. I'm reminded of how back in the day, the story kind of goes that Amazon, how did they measure their load time? And this was, 20 years before people were really thinking so much about performance. And I often find that too. It's unsurprising to me. The companies that get huge often do have an element of really caring about that user experience. And they used to not measure the load time of the page. They would measure to when does the search bar at the top of the page, when is it rendered and ready for the user? And they didn't really care how long the rest of the page took because they knew that was when people jumped in. And I feel like 20 years later, Core Web Vitals is kind of catching up to that idea that it's not a just generic loaded event. It's when, is the page settled down and actually available to interact with?
Yep. Because not only do we have to load the page faster because we want people to engage with it quicker and understand when they can, but people's attention spans have gotten shorter.
Yeah.
So, what used to take 3 seconds to load or something like that was super fast isn't available anymore because the person's only going to be on the page for, 5 seconds, depending upon how long. I'm not waiting anymore. I'm going to just do it later. And then, they never come back.
That must have been quite a challenge at Puppy Spot because, often e-commerce sites these days, you got 4K monitors, you want the best quality imagery. These assets can actually start getting quite large. They can add a lot of weight to the site. Obviously, people do have better, faster connections, but there's more weight coming through as well. How did that sort of get explored in your journey?
So, of course, the amount of weight that you're downloading immediately to the device has a big impact on it. So we would like to use pointers instead. So we could point to AWS or the S3, so we could just bring in the image virtually. And we found that, you could at the time go on our site and find that, there was these old pieces of code that had these large 2, 3, 4 megabyte images on it that would really slow down the page. And until you looked at it through a tool like Raygun to see that, you wouldn't be able to fix it. But of course, once you did fix it, it was a great improvement from just resizing the picture or putting a pointer to it or something like that.
Yep. One of the things we try to do a little bit as well inside of Raygun, I always find in these podcasts I like to share a little bit about some of the ways we work. We have a channel where, people celebrate wins. And one of them is always, a chart that shows maybe it's a load time or a SQL query or something that goes from 6 seconds to 0.1 of a second. And it's like, celebrating those victories.
Getting the SQL time down. You have these queries that are just like, it's locking up. It's taking 60 seconds. We don't understand why. And then, you look at the error code and you're like, oh, okay. It's now taking 0.6 seconds.
Yep. It's a great sense of achievement.
It is. It
Yeah,
really is.
I found that quite difficult when I stopped doing as much coding and actually moved more into the management side. I found it very difficult to feel like you were really doing work when you're undertaking management and leadership roles versus shipping code.
I don't like any long queries. I don't understand why any queries are long. They should all be instant. Let's optimize them all.
Yep, that's it. Jumping in and doing a quick I know how to fix that thing, and resolving it was a great sense of achievement. So if you were talking to product leaders these days, and they're thinking about the future or how they're going to build their software better, obviously you're a fan of Raygun, appreciate that, but more broadly as well, what would you be encouraging them to be thinking about these days?
Well, I think I definitely want them to encourage about making it easier to identify and fix. Mm-hmm. So as you talked about AI before and being able to query the log file. So rather than have to go through all the 16,000 characters that I don't understand to get to the 9 characters that I do, is there a way that I could just ask a question? Oh, what is the email address on this particular user or for this particular error? Or take me to the bit of code where this is breaking or this is the slowest. Where in this query is it slowing down? So just to be a little bit more proactive in terms to identifying where the error is rather than having to be a Sherlock Holmes, so to speak, that would definitely help. I'm a big fan of doing that because the more people that can identify the error, the more likely it's going to get fixed.
Yep. That is something that we're finding with that AI resolution for helping sort of actually understand what's going on. And I mentioned this in a prior podcast with somebody else where one of the things we found really interesting is that because these foundation models are trained on all of the open internet data, and because Raygun's APIs and formats of our payloads are all public, it innately already understands our JSON formats. And so we could actually give it the raw payload and be like, tell me what this is about. And it can figure it out. Exactly. It was amazing. So that is a really exciting area as well. One of the things I'm kind of also excited about we're exploring is the ability to take the list of error groups. So this is more closely aligned to maybe root issues. So we do aggregate them into those buckets, is actually being able to say, okay, well, that's great to have a list, and we have the affected user count. We typically encourage people to say, look, you probably want to look at the affected user. If one user has 10,000 faults versus 10,000 people with 10, having one, let's fix it for 10,000 people first. But there are times where you actually want to look at those groups in different ways. Maybe it be the complexity of the fix, or issues that we are certain are impacting the user experience, because that's the other challenge, right? Sometimes errors are benign. An example being, script blocker blocks loading the Facebook tracking script probably isn't going to stop anybody from using the site, but something that prevents the Stripe, component loading, bad.
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah. And that's one of the benefits of being able to see the number of times the error has occurred. Obviously, we would pick them off by the most, by the more prevalent ones first. But many of those times, you could just, oh my God, 300,000 errors. But you know what? It's nothing. It's not impacting anything. It's because somebody forgot to close a parenthesis or something like that. But it had no impact on time or anything like that. Yeah, we'll take care of it, but put it as a low priority or something like that.
Yep.
And then at the other end of the coin, though, there could be something that gets released that all of a sudden in the beginning of the release has a major impact on it, but it might not be shown because it's only happening on a specific browser, or it's only happening on a specific platform that you may not be testing regularly. So it's important to be able to identify those, because the new version of Chrome, it's showing up, but it's not showing it in any of the old versions of Chrome. But pretty soon everybody's going to be on the new version.
Mm-hmm. I like to be as transparent as possible. We obviously have bugs in Raygun too. And we got bit, I think it was last year, by a change where there was an update in Chrome that harmed our Raygun4JS file for a bit. We obviously responded quite quickly. We obviously have systems to observe faults, but you're exactly right. Sometimes something comes out and you're like, oh my goodness, like we didn't see that coming, Not sure about you, but I don't read the Chrome dev blog every day to see what's changing. But that ability to respond.
Well, and it's not just Raygun or our code. There could be external factors, which is why the alerts are very helpful.
Yep.
So something could happen where AWS makes a change, or they upgrade an internal system, or they upgrade one of their devices, or our device breaks on AWS, in the cloud, and all of a sudden you'll get an alert that says, your performance has been degraded by 10 or 20%, and you didn't even do a release, so you don't even know why it is. So it helps you to be able to rule things out and pinpoint what the actual error is.
Yeah, 100%. One of the things that I was also going to talk about, just to share more from the product side of things, is the way that we use the user tracking capabilities in Raygun. We obviously trust ourselves with our data. Different firms obviously have different privacy and regulatory requirements, so it's not a feature that everybody uses because they may not want to identify the users when they're logged in, but it certainly helps in a support scenario. And one of the areas I see is coming up where the real cutting edge user experience organizations are starting to do this with Raygun, which is if you're identifying the users and you can see that they had a fault that prevented them from doing something, automating the system with our APIs to then contact that user and offer a benefit. So we've seen people go, hypothetically, let's say it was Puppy Spot, and there was an issue with the checkout, and you go, oh, okay, well, these 52 customers all had an issue trying to go through a checkout flow. The system emails them and says, we saw you had a fault. Here's a $20 voucher.
I mean, that would, like I said, I'm not there anymore, but that would be a very valuable solution for them and for everybody, because it happens all the time.
Yep.
You have these failed checkouts, and why?
Yes.
Abandoned carts are abandoned carts, but failed checkouts are different. People intended to check out.
Yep.
Did they call up or did they not call up? Well, if they didn't call up, let's send them something.
Yep. And that to me is something I'm really looking forward to with some of the automation that's coming. We can talk AI, but broadly it's about how do we automate systems and do things more smartly without necessarily having to have so many people tasked to these things. But it's that putting right that counts, right? And nothing is worse than a bug that prevents you spending money when you want to spend money. I find that they're the ones that really, really get me annoyed, and I'm like, but I'm actually trying to be good. I want to give you money and you're not letting me do it. But then to turn that around and sort of say, hey, we put it right for you. That's the bit which seems to actually take a customer who is frustrated and turn them into a huge advocate.
Well, coming from the consumer standpoint, because I like to look at things from the consumer standpoint, you think as a consumer you did something wrong. Like, why is the site not working? What did I do wrong in order to do that? And then you get frustrated and you leave. Where this time, the organization is identifying, no, you know what? You didn't do anything wrong. It's our fault. There was a problem in the system at the time. Thank you for identifying it for us. Here's a $20 or whatever, and it makes it a much better situation because, they get a little satisfaction that they were doing it correctly.
Yes, 100%. We had a customer years ago in the e-commerce space who, in effect, their system fell over through their Black Friday sale. And, as an e-commerce organization, Black Friday is a pretty big deal. I've heard stats from certain categories where it's like up until that point of the year, the business is actually losing money. So it's really important that works. And they had the scenario where they didn't automate it, but they contacted all of the customers and said, hey, we're really sorry we went down. Here's the voucher. They ended up selling more than they forecast if the system had just worked by showing that level of care for the user. And I think that's such an important context because, again, I don't say this to be offensive to anybody. I'm a software developer at heart myself, but we can lose focus of why we build software. And software is always built for humans. It's really important to think about the human and the interaction model there. Even if you think it's an IoT system or it's a back-end thing, the only reason it exists is to somehow support another thing that's helping a human.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. David, I've really appreciated the time today. I would like to sort of offer a last question, if I will,
Sure.
on sort of the future according to David Horowitz. Where do you see things going? Think 5, 10 years. Obviously, there's a touch of the AI, but maybe not even just on that topic. What do you want to see?
I think going forward, I mean, again, I'm not a soothsayer, and I can't predict the future, but experiences will be much more personalized to the individual customer. So yes, AI will have a very important role to that, but know how to talk to my mom versus my sister versus my brother. It'll understand where I'm coming from. It'll understand what my location is, what my background is. So it could be a little more colloquial in terms of being able to relate to me a little bit better. And I think the more personalized experience will result in better customer satisfaction, and then also being able to take care of the customer and making sure that they come back and or buy again, and really be a proponent of your brand. With the with the evolution of all the different social medias, and one bad review can just get out of control and really hurt you. There has to be a way to temper that, and there has to be a way of people understanding, oh, this was service versus product problem, or this was a computer problem versus a personal personal problem. So, getting to know that as a little bit more personal and a little bit more into the customer's head, I think is the way of the future.
I would agree with that entirely. I take the view a little bit that if we call it AI at the moment, it's there's a lot of talk about alignment, and the way I see it is I think we've got it around the wrong way, that we're trying to build these models like there's one generic thing that applies to everybody, and I can see a future where in some way it does need to be protected, but it's really the context of you. And that context of you and everything about you being provided to properly customize things is really the alignment. It's the alignment to the individual, not the alignment to the model.
Exactly. No, well said.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to have this chat. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.